if you close your eyes. Good day, friends, and welcome to Pass It On, a Nice Nation talk show. Here on the show, we will speak to the people who ultimately will speak with you to share insights to what they feel will help guide students or staff or community personnel in the right journey of success. So join us here bi-weekly for the latest in criticism and discussion featuring the biggest relevant stories of students, representatives, and teachers in our environment today. I'm your host, Andre Quattlebaum, better known as Coach Q. My guest today is the Director of Schools Conflict Resolution Educational Programs at the Center for Dispute Resolution at the University of Maryland School of Law. She has directed the Maryland Judiciary-supported statewide conflict resolution educational grant programs as well. She's a graduate of Cornell University with a Bachelor's of Arts in English and History with a Master's in both as well. Currently, she serves as the chair of the Maryland Commission on the School-to-Prison Pipeline and Restorative Practices. As you can see, she brings a wealth of knowledge of professional experience in education. We asked her here today to discuss the collaborative action plan to create a statewide framework for the change in public schools disciplinary practices. It's an honor to have this great woman here today. Welcome, Ms. Barbara Corshell. As I always say, time is money, so let's get started. What is the Maryland Commission of Schools to State Prison Program?
This is a new commission that was set up just this past legislative session with
Okay.
the Maryland General Assembly to create a group, a commission, to really look hard at the issue of the school-to-prison pipeline and consider restorative practices, what's possible in terms of implementation, to move us away, to dismantle this school-to-prison pipeline.
Okay. Within that aspect, so are we saying the kids who become or get suspended end up doing things that ultimately will end up in prison?
That is actually what we're tracking. And
Okay.
It's not just prison. It's starting out in terms of pushing kids out. We know that there's disproportionality in our discipline data.
Okay.
Particular students are being disciplined, being sent out, office referrals, suspensions, expulsions in disproportionate numbers.
Absolutely.
And we know that those students are more likely to fall prey to the juvenile justice system.
True. Does the committee look at that disparity as far as, are we talking racial identification
Absolutely.
between blacks and whites, Hispanics, and things of that nature?
You got it. And
Okay.
there's another segment that's particularly sensitive. We know the data is strong that male students of color,
Right.
in some communities Hispanic students, and special ed students are being disciplined disproportionately.
Okay.
In 2014, the U.S. Department of Education and the Department of Justice issued what we call a Dear Colleague letter nationally, saying that this exists, this is real, and we have to change it.
Absolutely. How would this new endeavor that the state has authorized be instrumental to our Maryland public schools?
Well, the proof is in the pudding.
Okay.
What the commission is going to be doing, what we've begun to do, is really study this, look at it hard, look at our Maryland discipline data, look at best practices, look carefully at restorative practices. What tools does it provide? What alternatives can it create for changing what's been happening?
Right.
We know there's a real issue of implicit bias.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, students who have special needs are the ones who can least afford to miss school.
True.
So we need to think hard, and we've got tools. We need to look at the data about how restorative practices has been working,
Okay.
how it is working, and what it will take to create a state that is doing this at the state level within each of the 24 districts.
Right. And you're absolutely right when you talk about that. Some kids come to school with some social, some emotional distortments, which becomes conformed inside the school based upon their home background. So I guess a lot of times teachers, administrators don't understand the background of some of these population of kids who come to school with these type of behaviors, what may cause school problems, things of that nature.
I agree, and at the same time, unfortunately, teacher colleges, teacher courses don't offer enough
Right.
in behavior management. So you have teachers who are feeling pressured, I need to get through the curriculum, and this student is defiant or disruptive, so I need to get them out so I can get this done.
Absolutely.
Well, in fact, getting them out doesn't serve anybody. The teacher is less successful with all of their students. So what we really need to do is identify what strategies work most effectively.
Okay.
Whether there are some tools within this restorative practices framework that will help them build relationships and work on a community where we all work together and there's some accountability when behavior isn't good.
Okay. What's the most important part of your job? Of all the jobs that you may have?
Well, I am privileged to support educators.
Okay.
You know, I came from the field of education. I taught high school in Baltimore County and I taught overseas.
Okay.
So I know what it's like at the K through 12 level. My job today involves a lot of training with educators,
Okay.
with administrators, counselors, and teachers, helping them think about what they can do to manage conflict more effectively and strengthen relationships proactively so they have fewer differences.
Right. When did you know that you wanted to invest your time and energy into helping others?
It's who I am.
That's who you are?
Yeah, I had parents who really instilled that in me. And, you know, most people who go into education, I think, have that sense. It's really who I am.
Okay. Does your background in English and history, or has your background in English and history helped foster your development to where you are today?
There's no question about it. You know, understanding history is what helps us reach better conclusions, make better decisions. And with English, I spent a lot of time writing and reading and orally communicating, and I think those skills are critical in everything we do.
Absolutely.
You know, whether a student is going to be a plumber, he still needs to be able to read an invoice. You know, a mechanic, you need to talk. When you don't get along well with your colleagues, your coworkers, you need to have the language skills to express that. So I think that background really helped me become more comfortable
Absolutely.
with communication.
You are a certified coach as well.
Yes.
Okay. Can you expel upon what that actually means and what you do with that?
Absolutely. You know, once upon a time I coached tennis, but that's not what it's about. I'm a life coach,
Okay.
and I'm a conflict coach.
Okay.
So I work with adults. I've worked with individuals as young as 18 who have something going on that they're having a hard time figuring out.
Okay.
And family and friends can tell them what they should do. What I bring on as a coach is impartial and a set of skills to have questions to draw it out,
Okay.
to help individuals hear their passion. And when you hear your passion, it's easier to make decisions. For example, I've worked with individuals who don't know what they want to do professionally, or who want to make a shift, and they're not really sure how to go forward. And so, through my questioning and some thinking, some homework that they do when we're not in conversations, they make really exciting decisions. And
Absolutely.
I've seen big shifts in lives.
So within that training aspect, what's the most important thing that you want your trainees to get out of your training?
In terms of training restorative practices,
Yes, ma'am.
what I want educators to gain is more confidence that they can build relationships across divides. We're in a polarized society.
True that.
So if I look the way I look, coming from the suburbs, and I'm working in the inner city, I don't have to be the same, but I can still care about individuals and let them get to know parts of me with certain boundaries so that we can build relationships.
Okay.
At the same time, I want them to understand that restorative practices is not kumbaya, letting people off the hook.
True.
It provides a set of tools for holding people accountable. So when young people make impulsive decisions that hurt others, they gain real understanding of who's been harmed and are given an opportunity to make things right.
Right. We've had a colleague of yours, I guess maybe 3 episodes ago, Ms. Kathleen Rockefeller, and she's a liaison for the Anne Arundel County Public Schools, is actually trying to put more schools actively involved in restorative practices. And she talked about that 5 centerpieces. You know, how were you feeling when you did what you did? You know, do you think about others and things of that nature? Why is those 5 essential questions the cornerstone of restorative practices, in your opinion?
I'm not sure I'd call it the cornerstone. I would
Okay.
call it a very important tool.
Okay.
And it's doing things differently. You know, as adults, we come upon something that's not okay, and we go right into, why did you do that? Now, if I'm all upset about something, my response is going to be, I don't know,
Exactly.
or I didn't do it,
Exactly.
or he did it. What happened? provides an opportunity, it's respectful.
And it's also a reflective piece too.
It helps an individual think it through.
Right.
What were you thinking? Helps them find words. It might have been, I was thinking about what my brother did to me this morning before we walked out the door.
Absolutely.
And not what happened around the corner in the hallway.
Okay.
Who's been affected? Now we're helping them learn social emotional skills to think outside of ourselves.
Yes.
To think about others.
Okay.
What do you think you need to do?
Differently.
And in what way has somebody been affected?
Right.
You know, well, I think he was hurt. In what way? That's a hard question, because I'm still thinking about it from my framework. In what way? Well, you know, maybe the teacher, when I cursed her out, is angry and maybe she's upset because she can't teach. So they're thinking about the other. Now, as they're thinking through this, they can get to that point of, well, what can you do to repair it? That's an opportunity, and our punitive system doesn't offer that opportunity.
That's true. So I guess your job is not only, you have a lot of different things that you're doing, you're playing a lot of different roles. Is this a mandated thing that's going to happen in the state of Maryland as far as putting restorative practice in school? Your committee is to establish and to do what?
Well, actually, when I testified in Annapolis, when the bill was under consideration,
Mhm.
I had that very question from one of the delegates. Well, this makes a lot of sense. Why don't we just mandate it?
Okay.
That's not the way it works.
Okay.
What happens is a commission makes recommendations. The General Assembly looks at this and figures out what needs to happen. But ultimately, even with strong recommendations, it's up to laws to convene them. And at the same time, buy-in is a big piece of this. You can't mandate teachers to learn to set aside their own biases.
True.
You need to train them and work with them.
True.
And implementing this is really a change in the way most teachers work.
Yeah, and also, I mean, a kid, going back to a kid to process those particular 5 questions. As an adult, we both have to think about what it is and how we are affecting someone. Now we're asking kids to delve into things that they probably don't know how to understand, how to get that to come to their frontal point. So from the training aspect, what's the most important thing that you want your trainees to be able to learn from a kid, or be able to teach them how to have kids express themselves? Because a lot of times kids become reticent when it comes down to really opening up to share what they're really feeling internally.
You know, you talked earlier about the framework, and there's one framework piece that I think is really important. It's often called the fundamental hypothesis.
Okay.
And the idea is that you want to be with the student where they are.
Yes.
You want to provide them with the support that they need. So if I'm a student who doesn't understand how cursing somebody else out isn't working,
Mhm.
and how that's disruptive to the whole classroom, then I need to work with them. But at the same time, hold them accountable. No compromise, no limit setting. I'm not letting them off the hook.
Okay.
That to me is really core, and that holds not just with students, but with one another. If we're teachers and we're not getting along,
Right.
or we're co-teachers, or we're part of the same committee, or we have a parent who's really not working together with me as the teacher, I need to be with that individual and build up a relationship where I can understand that I'm trying to support them, but at the same time, there's certain things that are not going to be compromised.
Absolutely. I know when I went to graduate school, you know, for special education, and it talked about that co-ed aspect, that one teacher may have a specific point of view based upon their criteria, and the main teacher may have a synopsis of what they want to get out of the classroom. So that off balances certain kids, because I know that I can get away with certain things with this teacher in comparison to I know that I don't need to begin to try with that teacher. Which within the classroom setting, it makes it unbalanced. And I don't know who gets offended, whether the co-teacher or the main teacher, but the whole population within the room is distorted. And that goes back to the piece that you're talking about on how to express that. How long are typically restorative practices sessions?
Gosh, I wouldn't even call it restorative practices sessions, because restorative practices has a bunch of different tools.
Okay.
So it might be as brief as something called an affective statement, where here's a student who I just don't have a relationship with. So I can use statements like, I'm really impressed at the work that you did last night,
Okay?
instead of good job. Is that going to make that student feel a little closer to me, like I really noticed them?
Absolutely.
A student who's messing up, that's it. Cut it out, sit down. I might have to say that a dozen times and it doesn't work.
Correct.
But if I want them to understand a little more, I might say, you know, I'm really getting frustrated because I'm trying so hard to teach this. I think it's important that you learn. Could you raise your hand?
Right.
So, and I might have to say that many, many times. You know, what I described a moment ago is really something called the social discipline window.
Okay.
And it really works with adults, it works with the administrator and teachers.
Absolutely.
The idea of, I have certain limits. You're going to have to do certain things, but I'm going to support you and bring things along. We know that in our schools we're seeing a lot of trauma, where kids are behaving in a way that seems totally irrational. I thought I had a relationship with this student, and now he's not even listening to me.
Right.
So we need the skills to meet them where they are.
Okay.
I might need to de-escalate that student. So it's not like it's a session. That student, one remark isn't going to do it. Okay, it looks like you're having a hard time. Take a few minutes, come sit in the back of the class. Class, you need to do X, Y, Z. Let's talk in the hallway for just a minute.
Right.
And I might have a restorative chat and use some of those questions, the what happened? What were you thinking when you said that?
Mhm.
And work that out.
Absolutely.
On the more extreme side, you have bad things happen. Big fights where you might have to have suspensions, expulsions even. So what do we do with those students? We're not going to throw them away.
Right.
That's where we might do something called a formal conference, where we pull together those who are affected. And there's a lot of planning that goes in, and that session could take 30 minutes, it could take an hour.
Right.
But an agreement will hopefully evolve to hold that student accountable and to provide the support that student needs to be more successful next time.
Hypothetically, if you have a kid that is in school and he or she is causing more damage being in school by disrupting the education of everybody else, what kind of restorative practice would help with that particular student? Because you may have a teacher say, well, you know, he or she gets in trouble here and there, and when he or she is in the classroom, they're not helping the classroom environment. How could that piece be handled?
So, you know, varying degrees of students with challenges.
Okay.
For most of our students, the student that you just described may not feel like there's a relationship with an adult or many adults.
Okay.
So it really does start with the proactive. Most adults in the building think we need to fix the kids,
Right.
but a lot of the astute educators recognize that I need to look hard at what I'm doing and what's not working.
Right.
And that student is part of my class. So what can I do? How can I have some really authentic discussions about what we need to do together
Right.
to help you pass and to help me be able to teach successfully? And when a student messes up, we need to have some agreements on what's going to happen.
Correct.
But I think sending them away, punishing them, that's that school to prison pipeline. That's not working. So if that student doesn't have a relationship with me, I need to work on it. Now, there are some students who have particular challenges, and it may take, you know, in PBIS talk, positive behavior intervention supports, the red zone kids,
Right.
they may need really strong support
Right.
in terms of, well, you have a hard time sitting still, and I noticed just before lunch, that's when you get into trouble. Let's talk about something that you can do when you feel yourself getting that way. Do you think moving would help?
Right.
How about if you got up and walked to the back of the room and stood for a few minutes? And maybe we have some kinesthetics or something.
So it doesn't just start because those are the things that I learned through in graduate school that you do in child development. You give kids. So I guess even as young adults, we're still child developing.
You bet.
So doing those things, and you use. I guess it's a matter of the choice of words that you use when you talk about authenticity. Using that and having that conversation with the actual kid instead of talking at. I always feel that I am more receptive to kids to know that I'm working with them in comparison to working against them. As long
And
as they
kids
know.
have a meter.
Right,
They
exactly.
know when you're for real.
Absolutely. And a lot of times you're able to get more out of them when you asking them to work with me instead of I'm going to tell you what to do. I always say, help me help you. My job is to help you So allow me to help you by helping me do that.
It sounds like we think a lot alike. You
Ah.
know, if you respect the child, or you respect the colleague you're not getting along with, this pertains to adults as well.
Right.
You know, look, Mrs. Jones, the teacher across the hall, you know, I think we need to figure out how to work a little better together.
Right.
The kids can see that we're giving each other the dirty eye. You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, we need to get on the same page, and let's talk about what's going on here and work it out. That's basic conflict resolution.
That leads me to my next thing, but I need to say this. If I'm somewhat like you, then I'm going to have a great career. I can say that.
Thank you for that.
But no problem. How substantial is it for parents and students to understand conflict resolution? Can you touch on that? We talked about restorative practice. Is restorative practice conflict resolution as well, or are there two different mechanisms?
You know, the way I view it, restorative practices has a continuum of tools.
Okay.
And I think that conflict resolution is right in there as a big tool.
Okay.
How important is it? Well, I think as human beings, we all have ways to resolve conflict. The
Right.
question is, what ways? I know often, I hear in some of the conferences that I facilitated, adults, parents saying without blinking an eye, I told my child that if somebody disrespects him, he better fight. So they have conflict resolution. Do I get to come in and say, that doesn't work?
Right.
No, what I need to do is start where they are and help them understand, perhaps as the administrator, as the teacher, why that can't work in our school.
Correct.
And we need your support. I'm not going to tell you how to parent. I'm not going to disrespect you, but I'm going to ask you to work with us.
Exactly.
Because we want your child to be able to stay in school and not continuously be suspended
Right.
for getting into fights.
Okay. You've been in, I guess, Anne Arundel County. You now started off in Baltimore. What's the difference, in your astute opinion, of the level of thinking between county and inner city?
You know, it's interesting that you asked that. I've done training in probably half, at some point, of the 24 jurisdictions.
Okay.
And I don't think you can make a generalization. I think Baltimore City's getting a lot of bad press right now,
Okay.
but I believe that the problems that we're seeing exist all over. You know, I've done some training on the Eastern Shore, and at one training, adults raised the issue of addictions. That's not a city problem. It's showing up in small-town southern Maryland.
Showing up here in Anne Arundel County as well. It's more prevalent than it
Absolutely.
has been over the last
Yeah.
several years. But-
And, you know, the fighting, we can look at the data and see where the disproportionality is the strongest.
Right.
But I think the issues that exist, sadly, statewide and nationally, generally speaking,
Okay.
I think that we're really struggling with how to support our students so that they can manage their emotions and can deal with conflict and the host of emotions that are shutting down their learning.
Right. I'm gonna get you out of here shortly. I'm really enjoying this conversation that we're having. How is truancy handled on the state level in comparison to the local level? Is there a balance, or is it the same throughout the America?
You know, truancy is being handled in lots of different ways.
Okay.
In Maryland, we actually introduced a program that was called truancy mediation.
Okay.
I had seen it at a conference in Ohio where they were doing it broadly. The idea of mediation is instead of a judge, you know, slapping $50 on a student, or once upon a time, kids were being suspended for being truant. That's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
So what this does is it brings together parents and students and an impartial, together with a representative of the school, usually a teacher who knows the student, and together identify what's needed to keep the student in school. This was a prevention program largely focused on kindergarten through 8th grade.
Okay.
Because at those points, it's usually a family issue. It's not the stereotypical child just not wanting to be in school.
Right.
There's something going on. And the students who are largely truant later on often have that track record that starts very early. So that, we partnered with the Community Mediation Maryland, and introduced that in a couple of different jurisdictions.
Okay.
That works. There are some other programs existing along the same lines, because we know that legally what's going on isn't really helping.
Right. Why do you think kids don't want to go to school anymore?
Couple of things. I think the students who don't want to be there don't feel a part of the community.
I totally agree.
So it comes back to restorative practices and how do we strengthen our communities? Not just relationships between me, the adult, and the student, but how do we build relationships within the kids? There's a school in Prince George's County that has huge diversity, a lot of Central American students,
Okay.
really coming out of places of trauma. And I was told by one teacher in the ESOL program that these kids would come on Friday because they knew they had circle them. Kids want to be a part of things, so we need to create a space for every child, even the child who's misbehaving.
Absolutely. There's
And
a
let them
space for every
know
child.
somebody cares
Mhm.
and somebody's going to support them, even if they're reading at the 3rd grade level and they're 11th graders.
Okay. How many members are a part of you're the chair, how many other members are part of your committee?
The commission is 23 members.
Okay.
We have 2 legislators,
Okay,
and we have a bunch of nonprofit leaders
okay,
representing, the ACLU,
Okay.
community conferencing, ARC of Maryland. It's all on House Bill 1287 or on our website.
okay.
At the same time, we have representatives, we have a PTA representative, we have a principal, we have an MSDE representative
Okay.
appointed by the superintendent. So we've got representatives who are
All
all
over.
looking at this.
Okay. And how often do you guys meet?
We're meeting about every 6 weeks, but we're starting to do smaller work groups because
Okay.
we've got a lot to do before our final report would be written.
And your final report is going to be written by when?
We're going to finish it up by December of 2018.
Okay,
And it'll go back, and our commission has finished its work at the end of June of 2019.
okay. And by being the chair, what is the most important thing that you want to get addressed, that you will go by any means necessary to make sure that this gets done?
I want some really strong, clear recommendations on how we can implement restorative practices if we find that the data supports this one.
Okay, well, glad you made it here today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.